Today's Do Now questions are centered around the age of exploration, but specifically the interaction of the Europeans with the indigenous peoples like the Aztecs or the indigenous peoples of Africa, Africans. So, number one, what were the European motives for exploration? Number two, how did interaction with the Spanish conquistadors affect indigenous Americans? Number three, why is the Columbian Exchange viewed as a positive effect of European exploration? And then number four, why was the transatlantic slave trade created? Number five, how are Africans affected by the slave trade? That is our focus for the lesson today. Today's review is the last review for the Age of Exploration. Begin your notes. The Age of Exploration was a significant time period that created a global community. This is what we focused on in Wednesday's lesson. The New World, which consisted of the Americas, North America, South America, and the Old World, which consists of Europe, Asia, and Africa, were now connected. No ocean could keep them separated anymore. The ocean will no longer create a gap between these two different continental areas because the Age of Exploration connects these two significant lands. You're writing quickly. If you're behind, that's because you didn't start writing at the very first bullet point. So that means as we move forward, always have your pencil in hand so that you're writing at the same time everyone else is. No one should be behind. You're only behind because you chose to be behind. So here we go to the next one. There were strong economic, so money, economic and political reasons why Europeans sought after new lands and markets. Remember, the whole last lesson we talked about gold. Mercantilism is driving this age of exploration. The need for gold is driving this exploration. That's the economic reason. However, the motives of exploration can always be summarized with a phrase of God, gold, and glory. I know we touched on this in a couple of my blocks on Wednesday. So just summarizing the idea of God, gold, and glory, those are the motives for exploration. God is a motive for exploration because Europeans want to spread Christianity to the New World. When they encounter these indigenous peoples, they think that they are, they're definitely different, but the Europeans view them as inferior. The Europeans have like this "I feel bad for them" attitude. And because of that, the Europeans want to spread their ideas, especially that of religion, to these indigenous peoples. Gold is a motive for exploration, which is what our entire lesson on Wednesday was about. European monarchs wanted more land and resources to make their nations wealthy. Because gold is a part of mercantilism, of course, there's going to be competition around who's going to get that gold first, who's going to find these resources to sell those resources and get the gold. So all of the reasons for exploration are really centered around this gold. Glory, monarchs themselves aren't going to be traveling across the Atlantic Ocean to this new world. They're sending explorers who want to be famous and recognized in their mother countries. So explorers from Spain, Portugal, Great Britain, France, and some other European nations. Those explorers want to be recognized in those countries for what they were able to accomplish. So glory. God, gold, glory, the motivations for exploration. One group that is heavily recognized during this time are the conquistadors. And when I say conquistadors, hopefully you hear the word conqueror in there. A conquistador is an explorer and a conqueror from Spain, specifically Spain. So right here you have the map of Europe. Spain is located on this portion here. And so in Spain, the people are called Spanish. So when the Spain traveled to the New World, they end up colonizing land that is today Mexico. And when you think of what language people in Mexico speak, they speak Spanish. And it's because the Spanish from Europe brought that language over to the New World during this age of exploration. So conquistadors are super significant to the development of society in the New World. Quickly copying this down. For those of you that are still writing or not writing, you could take a look here. This would be an example of a caravel. These are the types of ships that they're using to travel these oceans. So the age of exploration happens because technologies like this develop. The conquistadors explored the lands of the New World and established colonies for the Spanish king. Indigenous Americans were living in the New World, and these indigenous peoples are what you know as the Native Americans. The Native Americans are what we refer to often as the Indians. So right here, just want you to see that these are the indigenous peoples of the Americas. We clearly see that they're Indians, they're Native Americans, and this would be the Aztec population actually. And you can see that their civilization's pretty big. You know, they've developed it really well. And then you have guys like this, the conquistadors, who obviously appear very different. And so you have the conquistadors who are going to interact with these people in the New World. And I know that this is not underlined, so just take a look at your notes and make sure you get this. Just taking a look here at this picture, I just want you to see that Spain is right here, and this is the amount of land that they colonize in the New World. So Spain does claim quite a bit of land in the New World, but they're doing this by taking over these Native American populations, these indigenous peoples that have been there for hundreds of years, even a century or so. One of the most famous indigenous groups, again, are the Aztecs, and they established a huge empire in what is today Mexico. The Aztecs, when I say they established an empire, it's not just like when we envision Indians, it's not like we see teepees and flat land. This is a giant civilization, you know, with very significant monuments, like even pyramids. So they're very stable and very advanced. They're not as inferior as what the conquistadors believed they were. The Spanish conquistadors explore this area and they end up conquering this area. Why? The Aztec Empire is going to fall to the Spanish. Again, there's probably going to be some kind of battle. They're going to fall to the Spanish and they lose. But here's why. Let me go back so you can copy this down before I get too far ahead. So on this page, what you need to know, Aztecs, they're in the New World. The Spanish conquistadors conquer the Aztecs so that Spain could set up a colony for the Spanish. And if I were there and right now in class, I would ask, why does Spain want to colonize this land? What's in it for them? Why do they need this land? Why do they want this land? And hopefully you're thinking of something that has to do with mercantilism. Hopefully you're thinking of the word gold. Hopefully you're thinking of the word resources. Hopefully you're thinking of the word wealth. Reasons why the Aztec Empire fell so easily to the Spanish conquistadors. The very first thing is that European weapons were way more advanced. You have Native American indigenous peoples who are fighting with bows, arrows, even spears. I can't say that word right. But then you have the Europeans who are bringing guns. You know, they have this thick armor as well. So when it comes to being able to pierce one of the conquistadors with maybe a spear or a bow and arrow, it is not always going to be a guarantee hit because of that tight armor. And then number two, the second major reason why the Aztecs fall so easily to the Spanish is actually for a really sad reason, that the Aztec population, the entire Aztec population, is going to weaken and die off from the Spanish diseases. These worlds have not interacted in forever. We're talking centuries and centuries and centuries and centuries of these humans being so isolated from each other. So the diseases that had developed in Europe, Africa, and Asia, those had never developed in the New World. So when those diseases came, those people got so sick. Their bodies had not developed any immune system to fight that off. So Spanish diseases are going to lead to the decline of that population. The indigenous Americans, like the Aztecs, they die in large numbers. So the indigenous Americans, the Aztecs, the Incans, all these Native American groups, they're going to die in large numbers because they had never been exposed to diseases of the Old World. So when Europeans like the conquistadors came to the New World, these diseases were spread to the native populations very quickly. Entire populations of Indians were completely wiped out, and I'm not being dramatic. It is written in recorded history. There are populations that just there are groups of Indians who just no longer exist because of these diseases. It's estimated that up to 20 million indigenous people die from these European diseases. So it's not even that they all die from just fighting battle. It's they never even had the chance to defend their empire because they were also weakened from these diseases. Once the colonies of Spain and many other European nations were established, they began to take lots of resources from the land. And if I were there, I would say, why do they want these resources? It has to do with wealth. Native Americans were dying from the European diseases. And Native Americans are the ones who are being used to harvest these resources. Europeans essentially are being lazy. They don't want to, pull up these resources. They don't want to do the work. So Native Americans were doing that work, but they were dying. They weren't a great source of labor. So European leaders began searching for disease-resistant workers. And they found those workers in Africa. Africa and Europe and Asia are all connected, so they had been exposed to the same diseases over time. So Africans were more immune to diseases that were killing the Native American populations. So Europeans get involved with the slave trade that had already existed in Africa, but Europeans definitely abused that system of trade a lot more. The transatlantic slave trade does develop. Triangle trade does develop. So instead of just having the Columbian exchange between the New World and Europe, you now include the continent of Africa. And right now, as I'm saying that, I'm actually talking with my hands and I'm drawing this triangle and making this connection of I have Europe, I have the Americas, now I'm going back to Africa. So there's this constant movement in a triangle direction. You're moving slaves. And that's going to destroy African cultures. They're going to become weak. So in Africa, the African cultures that were there, are completely destroyed. You're separating people. You're taking a lot of them men. Yes, there are women, but a lot of these slaves that are forced to migrate are men. And so when you talk about culture, like, if a group of people is only thriving on the female aspect, especially when your culture is so reliable on, men do the hunting and then women do the taking care of the children and then just kind of the home things, you're losing that part. So when the men are being forced to leave, so civilization's going to fall apart in Africa as a result of the slave trade. So just seeing here that most of the slaves are going to South America, specifically in Brazil. One of the big resources that's there is sugar, and you need sugar to sweeten your tea, and so the British definitely get involved with that. Just seeing here a couple of pictures of the slave ships. These are things that should not be out of the ordinary. We've seen these before. Just understanding here that new resources are leaving the New World, going to Europe. In Europe, they're going to make products. They're going to sell these products here in Africa for the purchase of slaves. Those slaves are going to be brought to the Americas to harvest more resources and that sort of thing. The big positive effect of this time period was the Columbian exchange. Unfortunately, the slave trade did develop. That would be a negative effect. But if we look at and we try to find something that's positive about this time period, it's going to be the Columbian exchange. Colonies harvested resources for their mother countries. These resources were used to make products that were then sold for gold. So the more resources you had, the more gold you would get. And that defined wealth. This was the goal for every European nation during this time. As the Columbian exchange improved those lives, Also, the colonial exchange improves lives in Europe because new foods were being added to their diet, making their lives more healthy. Just taking a look here, we've seen this several times before. One thing that's on here that is outside of food or animals, which is used for food, you have diseases leaving Europe and coming to the New World. The Columbian Exchange is the exchange of goods and resources between the Old and New Worlds, led to the development of the triangle trade. We hinted at this the last class. As slaves were needed in the New World, Africa was added to the large trade network. I just mentioned this a couple of slides ago. So right here, I know it says video overview, but your teacher will walk you through what's going to happen next.